Edgar Welch, a North Carolina man, was killed by police recently after they say he pulled a gun on them. That name has not been in the news for a long time, but those who do recognize it will know that he entered Comet Ping Pong under, while believing Pizzagate conspiracy theories that there were children being abused and trafficked there, armed with a rifle and a revolver, and fired shots. Eventually he walked out and surrendered to police. But this is a grim update about the Pizzagate gunman, which, I think made headlines early in the first Trump era as like a clear consequence of this conspiratorial thinking that was starting to become, a dominant cultural force.
It's fascinating to me because I believe it was December of 2016 when this guy was first arrested. And there's a sort of full circle as it relates to the sort of MAGA influencer movement. And you see the people who they prey upon for their clicks, for their money, for their stature, and what happens to them. And you see one perfect example is Jack Posobiec, who repeatedly promoted the Pizzagate conspiracy. He's almost synonymous with it still. And where is Jack now, and where is this guy now? And I think that those two trajectories where these MAGA influencers get everything they could possibly want in terms of attention and fame and proximity to power, and the people who undergird their celebrity are people like this. And it's such a he becomes almost a footnote as he's gunned down by cops.
Yeah, Jack Posobiec is now speaking on the same stages as Trump, a prominent figure at one of the most well-funded activist organizations today, Turning Point USA. And this guy, he believed the kind of things that Jack was saying, ruined his life for it, came very close to hurting people over it. And what was the response then? They claimed maybe he was like a FBI false flag kind of thing. And now he's dead. And the people that promoted the kind of things that took his life sideways are not mourning him. They're not, there's no like expression of guilt here. But it is, I'm not happy that he was killed by the police or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole scene is so gross, right? It leaves you with a bad vibe.
It is just this perfect like vignette of that dynamic, though.
Absolutely.
Comet Ping Pong has great pizza, though. When I lived in DC, I went.
I've never eaten there,
times.
and I've been meaning to. I'm going to go down for the inauguration. I'm going to try to some firsthand experience. Maybe I'll have. I'll see what it's like on the day of the inauguration.
I've been several times. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. They have like some local music there and stuff. I remember when all of that happened, I was like personally enraged because this pizza place I enjoy.
James Alefantis, the guy who the chef who runs Comet Ping Pong or launched it or whatever. Really interesting thing from him when I talked to him once and about the fallout of Pizzagate and everything. And it's almost sad to hear, but like, he really believed after Trump won that maybe like he was like, well, he technically was a liberal Democrat from New York, and that's where he was, or that's what he thought he was in his mind, and that like once the campaign rhetoric was over, that he was just going to settle down and be, he was going to actually govern as a moderate or whatever. And then this guy was blindsided by something that's like far stranger than simply far right politics.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared Holt here with Mike Hayden. This is our first return full-length episode. We've got a conversation with Kevin Kruse on the back end of this one that we're really excited to share. before we get going, I just want to express gratitude because the response to this show coming back has been so kind and so enthusiastic, and you all have really warmed my cold, cold heart.
It takes a lot to warm me, actually, because I have this Arab blood, and when it's 7 degrees outside in New York, I appreciate all the love I can possibly get.
Are you ready for the worst segue you've ever heard?
Yes.
Well, if you lived in LA, your blood might be a little warmer.
God.
I should be thrown off a building for that.
Yes.
There has been fires ravaging LA. It's caused an obscene amount of destruction already. I saw Mike Rothschild, who listeners of the show will remember from prior episodes. Just great guy, knows so much backwards and forwards about conspiracy theories and QAnon and all that. He unfortunately lost his home during these fires. So listeners, if you follow Mike, if you appreciate Mike, send him your love, support him how you can. As these fires have been burning, the rhetoric around it online has just been completely abysmal. You have Trump himself just mocking the governor of California. You have a lot of the MAGA pundits just throwing out all kinds of conspiracy theories. I've seen the space lasers shit recirculate again and that sort of thing. And a lot of them are trying to blame DEI or, LGBTQ people for these fires. That, maybe if the fire department in LA was less focused on, trying to be a decent place to work, maybe the fires would be out by now. And it is just really, really bleak, really gross.
Yeah, no, it's really scary. Like, on the Gavin Newsom front real quick, like it used to be like a kind of a third rail in politics that you would not attack political figures who are in the middle of a crisis. Like you would not just go directly into it. At least some time would have to go to shows of exposure to expose failures of leadership. So you think back to something like when George Bush got a lot of people criticized George Bush. It took a while for those criticisms of George Bush after Katrina to manifest. He had to show that he was actually being pretty negligent. Trump's like instant hit makes it like very clear that he's putting politics above people here. And when I say it used to be considered something you don't do, the fact that nobody seems to notice anymore is what's really troubling. It's like, I mean, I don't care who the governor of California is. This is a time where you got to obviously stand back and let somebody do their job and express sympathy. There's nothing else to do. But Trump broke those rules much in the way that you have like in the mafia, where it's like, oh, we don't affect children. We don't do that. Trump has no rules. And I think this is an example of his celebrity being so much bigger than our norms, whatever you want to call them, that it almost doesn't matter and doesn't affect him.
My precious norms.
One other thing on the DEI front also is the kind of game of telephone that has gone on about it, where it's just sort of like there's some stupid document where it's like, of course you want to hire more black firefighters or whatever. You need more firefighters, period. It's a dangerous job. If your recruitment is not reaching everybody, it's not reaching everybody. But that turned into like, it went to libs of TikTok and then eventually went to Elon Musk. And the story, like, the subtext of the story quickly became, oh, they fired all the white firefighters. They replaced them with black firefighters. None of this is true, by the way. And that's why you have the problem. The black people don't actually do the job. And that is the subtext of what is being said. It's grotesque. If you frame it that way, they'll say, no, that's not what we're saying. But to me, it is what they're saying. And the fact that they're willing to do this in the middle of such a situation is so grotesque.
Even if I'm going to be my most charitable, which these people do not deserve, even if they don't think that's what they're saying, that is clearly what the audience is receiving. It has become like almost the dominant conversation about the fires online on X, and looking elsewhere in the news, this is the kind of thing that I guess Mark Zuckerberg has looked at and been like, damn, how come we don't have people blaming a wildfire on black people on Facebook. In the news last week, Meta announced that, well, it appointed Dana White to the board, which is a whole can of worms. But they are also ending their third-party fact-checking program, which is what got a lot of the initial headlines. But what I think is maybe more concerning about what they announced is that they are essentially scrapping content moderation, except for extremely illegal stuff like child abuse and that sort of stuff. They said they're not using automated systems to try to find stuff like hate speech anymore, and revise their rules so that it is permissible on Facebook to say that like trans people are mentally ill or that immigrants are subhuman. It's a very conscious choice, and they want more of it. And at the same time, they also said they're going to start putting more political content into people's feeds, which is something they slowed down in like 2021, 2022, after users were complaining that they were tired of seeing this stuff. So Facebook is still very popular among like certain age demographics, especially, and among some certain communities like diaspora communities and stuff, or in even hyper-local communities. They've done a lot to try to, copy Nextdoor and that sort of stuff. So this does not bode well. The third-party fact-checking thing, I think, is concerning, but giving up on content moderation like this, I think, is way more concerning, because fact checks, like putting a little note on a post that's like, well, actually, that's not totally true. There's been a lot of debate about how effective that is. It's post hoc, right? So it's like, if somebody saw the post before the label was applied, it's less likely that they're going to go back to the post and then see the label and be totally convinced that, oh man, I think I got this one wrong. What really matters is how these platforms are moderated. When all these platforms like Facebook and stuff abandoned chronological timelines and started sorting content, that became like the distinguishing factor in my eyes of what the tone is on the platform and how people experience the platform and stuff. So rolling that stuff back, I think, is going to be a lot more consequential in a cultural and social way than ending their agreement with PolitiFact or USA Today to add corrections to posts and stuff. So lame. And I guess they were censoring a 404 media story about this stuff. So,
well, my thought about this is that, like, Zuckerberg's, the stereotype of Zuckerberg that goes back for decades is like a robot without feelings and whatever. And I kind of internalize that a lot when I see him still. And I think that he just does, much like a robot, just does, its orders to survive. So does Zuckerberg. So everything he does is just survivalist, trying to keep the company where it is. And he, I think, is looking at the landscape right now. You look at something like TikTok, which cut into his money. TikTok is on the verge of potentially, it could potentially be blocked out of the United States. Who's one person who can fix that? And it's Donald Trump. He can order his Department of Justice to not pursue TikTok if, they're given a window to do so. He can do a lot of things. And if he thinks that, that Meta is against him and is one of these things that are out to get him and is not pro-Trump and is not part of the MAGA, they're not on board, he might be more inclined to lean towards TikTok and his fans on TikTok and try to help them stay afloat. Whereas he may look at it elsewhere and say, like, wait a minute, what about Instagram Reels can do their job? And Trump is wild. He goes wherever the wind blows. And, that's why I think a lot of these people, including Jeff Bezos and everyone else, are trying to curry favor with him. They want to maintain their position. And in Musk's case, it's much more sinister in the sense that, like, there is some ideology there. I don't think it's, breaking news to call Elon Musk a bigot. So he's motivated by something there. But he is not a person who wants to maintain the status quo. He's a person who wants to become the first trillionaire. He's got all the makings of a James Bond villain. So that's a little bit different. He involves himself in the campaign, whereas somebody like Mark Zuckerberg says, "Hey, Trump, don't shoot. I'm one of your best. I'm one of your best.
Remember
customers."
all the good times we had? Yeah. Also in Trump land, the possibility that Trump would issue huge pardons to January 6 rioters is really starting to shape up. It is confirmed at this point. I mean, he's had sympathy for January 6 rioters for a long time, recorded that song with him. Some reporting out of NBC on January 6, Trump reportedly called Ashley Babbitt's mother. Ashley Babbitt was the woman who was shot and killed by police during the Capitol riot. Right. Offered some hope to the January 6 rioters. You have people like Alex Jones and Marjorie Taylor Greene basically saying it's a done deal. And every time Trump gets asked about it, he seems to let on just a little bit more of like, well, we're going to look at the cases, but yeah, like pretty much this is happening.
It's like the containment lock in Ghostbusters. And for people who are familiar with Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, it means more than just the individuals going out, particularly to groups like that.
Yeah.
Because the Proud Boys are going to, they're going to look at that as an invitation to reassemble, and that they won't be, that they won't be policed, quite frankly, that they're above the law. And then they can continue to operate as a, pro-Trump street gang, the way they did in during his first term. Which is they would show up to antagonize anyone who was there to protest him. So Trump would have whatever power he has over federal law enforcement, and then he would have his own street gangs out in force. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that the Proud Boys are likely to reform, and if they don't, it will be nothing short of good luck.
Yeah, I mean, there's already a big cluster of Proud Boys chapters, which kind of just been floating around, not totally organized, trying to kind of get their shit together again. Right. And exactly. They're very excited about these pardons. They are kind of quiet at the moment. I think the general consensus is like, don't fuck this up for us. But yeah, if and when, these groups are going to go gangbusters, they're going to get a bunch of publicity for it. They are going to almost certainly start trying to recruit again. And it will send the message that the administration is okay with this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Or even if it's not actual violence, just a show of force in places, to intimidate. The other thing is on a local level, you have so many local cops are like very pro-Trump. And after this, after they've been absolved of these January 6 things, I think a lot of police are going to read into that as a reason to absolve them as well. Yeah, it's something to monitor, something to look at, and nothing to be happy about.
Safe to say that none of this is especially optimistic, but it does have some precedent. And we're going to talk about some of those precedents with Kevin Kruse. Very excited to share this conversation we had with him last week. I hope you all enjoy.
When nothing is enough, it gets tough just to smile. When every crack is a canyon, every inch feels like a mile.
Joining Posting Through It now, we have Kevin Kruse. He's a professor of history at Princeton University. We're really excited to have him on. Kevin, how's it going?
Going all right. How are you?
Going all right. We finally got some snow in Chicago, which gets like nice and quiet and pretty. So I'm enjoying that. My dog is certainly enjoying that. Is it snowing over by you, Mike?
No, but it was in New York extraordinarily freezing for several days.
The Trump administration is starting to take shape with reporting that's been coming out, especially over the last few weeks. A little bit of a clearer idea of where things are going, both politically and culturally, it is starting to emerge, or at the very least be understood more widely. I'm really happy that we have you on the show to help us kind of understand where historical parallels may exist. I see a lot of people try to make them, and they're not always, as rigorous as it seems sometimes. But, hopefully try to get some perspective and try to understand this through a broader lens that is maybe less like hyper-focused in the moment and more kind of instructive on what might be coming down the road at us. So to start, I'm just curious in a general sense, is there a historical parallel in your mind about like this moment in political and cultural history? Is there like one that you go to?
Yeah, I mean, the one I go to is kind of the near miss where we almost had Trump before Trump, which is George Wallace. And a lot of people have made this comparison. I'm not original here, but if you study Wallace at all, the comparisons are almost eerie. In fact, I've been lecturing at Princeton for 25 years. I've got a lecture on the silent majority where I show some clips from George Wallace rallies, and I've shown the same clips. It's from a great documentary on PBS. It came out about a decade or so ago. And I show the same clips for a long time now of Wallace at these rallies. And as soon as Trump came on the scene, the students' reactions switched on a dime. It went from being, look at this weird old curiosity from the past to, oh my God, this is exactly what we're seeing on the news today. And I mean that not just in terms of the politics, right? Kind of an angry populism, railing about an establishment, pretending to be the champion for a white working class that has been screwed over in countless ways, but also the style, right? The kind of the sinister laughter, the singling out people for attacks, both at some remove, but also literally people in his rallies, whether they be the press or some liberals who come to taunt him. It's remarkable. And so we've seen this in Wallace. We saw elements of this before in Huey Long. We saw elements of this before in Pat Buchanan. But these are all also rans in presidential history, right? People who never made it all the way. And so what we've seen with Trump is this thing that we've seen before, always a minor note in American politics. It's been there in the past before. This isn't entirely new, but it kind of broke out of containment, right? And now we're seeing the kind of the kind of horrifying what if George Wallace had become president? What if, Huey Long had become president and had all the powers of that office at his disposal? And that's where we are right now. So it is something new. I mean, we saw it with Trump 1, but I think it's going to be even worse with Trump 2. But it's something that we've seen in smaller episodes throughout American history, but never quite on this scale, never with this kind of set of stakes.
Well, Wallace never had that level of celebrity, just a fraction of it. Do you think that Trump's, because of Trump's ubiquity, is his ability to reach so many people? Is there a way to sort of, contain him now? Because now he is, arguably the most famous person in the entire world.
Yeah. I mean, Wallace was popular. I think there was a poll in 1968. He was like the 8th most respected man in America, if you can imagine that.
Really?
He was actually just ahead of Nixon.
I had no idea he ever got that much traction.
Oh yeah, and it wasn't just a Southern phenomenon, right? If you look at Wallace's runs in 64 and 68, he's hugely popular in the Midwest, right? He nearly wins the Indiana primary in 1964 on a campaign that's run by 2 Klansmen working out of a payphone at a gas station. Wisconsin, he almost takes his campaign's run by a housewife off her kitchen table, literally. So, these kind of threadbare political machines were still able to get that kind of cachet in these places you wouldn't expect it. He goes to Milwaukee and a bunch of Polish steelworkers greet him with a rendition of Dixie in Polish, right? So he's got kind of a broader appeal than people imagine. But your point about the media is really right. Like, Trump has a level of not just celebrity, but constant access to his voters in the way in which Wallace never really did, right? The Wallace campaign made a huge connection with ordinary voters, right? The Wallace headquarters were getting countless donations. I mean, people sending dollar bills and coins in an envelope. Most of his donations came in under $50. Again, very unlike Trump, kind of tied to the billionaires. But they had that kind of connection with him. They loved his speeches. They loved seeing him. He was hard to find, right? You can't, he would maybe get on Meet the Press and take advantage of that, or they would show news clips and he would take advantage of that. But a lot of it was kind of retail politics of these rallies he would have, and that worked a lot like Trump's rallies. Trump, however, has not only his own social media network, I guess two now. Twitter's or X is effectively True Social 2.0. But he's got kind of the Fox News cinematic universe out there promoting him in every possible way. The podcast world. I mean, there are a million different ways in which Trump is, whether you want it or not, beamed into your life on a daily basis, right? And that I think is really remarkable.
Yeah, I mean,
well, you brought up something we wanted to get into. Sorry, Jared.
Oh, I was going to say, like with Elon Musk, he kind of also has a Klansman working in a telephone booth. That's a bad joke. That's a bad joke.
Like a Klansman working in charge of AT&T, right? I mean, it's a little different.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask on this question of like precedent. To me, there is no precedent for what has happened with tech in recent years and its ability to, nothing in American politics. And I was just curious your thoughts. I know you were early. You moved over to Blue Sky early. I've been offline, finishing my book for like the last year. I've just started, posting there. You have Meta now, kind of shifting to this subtly pro-Trump policy position in recent days, and you have X obviously run by the shadow president. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, and Trump will ultimately be potentially the decision maker on TikTok, right? Where if ruling goes against TikTok, he has a chance to keep it alive. So that would certainly empower him on that platform. I think the dangers here are pretty obvious, but I mean, has there ever anything since like the invention of the printing press that's been anything like this for an American leader?
I mean, in some sense, yeah, you could look at the way in which what we now refer to dismissively as the mainstream media in the post-war era, the post-World War II era, really did come together to form what they call the foreign policy consensus, right? There was in the early years of the Cold War a set of expectations about what was permissible and what was not in terms of opinions about American foreign policy, right? And certainly far left opinions, maybe some far right ones too, frozen out of that. And there were certain assumptions about America's rightness in the Cold War, America's need to be involved in the Cold War. Isolationism was largely kicked to the curb. It had been long before, but maintained that in the post-war world. And so you see a lot of conservative foreign policy voices who really wanted that kind of return to isolationism or don't want that kind of engagement on the Cold War, or more liberal ones who want a kind of an early form of détente and peace with Stalin. Are largely frozen out of that and have to look to other means to get their message out. And so in some ways, we've got a comparison to that today, but never on this scale. You've never had a president who had the media so in his pocket. And it's not just Facebook and Meta, as cravenly as they've kissed the ring. What Bezos has done with the Washington Post is just as bad. What's going on with the LA Times is just as bad, if not worse. I think people...
You're talking about the retracted endorsements.
Yeah. I think people...
Or retracted endorsements for Kamala.
Right. And I think people sometimes maybe look at social media, with a little bit of a grain of salt, that they shouldn't take everything there seriously. But major newspapers abdicating their role here of kind of just kissing the ring. And the New York Times is the same way. They wouldn't admit this, but their editorial bent under Sulzberger or whatever, the 14th, which I don't know which one we're up to now, is really really remarkable. And so we've never had this level of kind of craven capitulation to the press. I mean, you look back to Nixon. It was open war with the press, right? And that's where this new phase came from. Roger Ailes said he kind of took inspiration from seeing how badly Nixon was being abused by the mainstream media during Watergate, that conservatives need to have their own voices. And we're now living in the fully realized vision of that world.
I think a lot of people, including myself, when we think of sort of the enabling cultural, social factors that have let the MAGA movement sort of run buckshot over U.S. society, I think a lot of it, in my mind at least, has to do with, breakdown of public trust, and not just, oh no, people don't trust the government. That's American as apple pie, but people don't trust other sources of authority. They don't trust their politicians. They don't trust media outlets. They don't trust each other. And I think in that environment, cynicism has become a really potent political currency.
Yeah.
I have talked to people. One of the sort of devil's advocate arguments I hear is that, well, politics has always been chaotic. There's always been these undercurrents and whatnot. But can you think of a point in our history where that sort of breakdown in, I'll just vaguely call it public trust or even public confidence has happened? And like, what kind of things have come from that? I think with the Trump 2, there's a very obvious political consequence to it. But I'm curious your thoughts about whether there have been other times in American history where the culture and society has, gone through things like this, and sort of what had come of it in prior iteration.
Nothing this bad comes to mind.
Yeah.
In terms of kind of the general breakdown and distrust. When we think of kind of crisis moments in the last century, we've had really chaotic periods before. You look at, say the period after World War I, Spanish flu, kind of similar effects to COVID, massive unemployment, inflation. You've got sweeping social changes like prohibition, women's suffrage. There's all kinds of chaos going on in the country. You've got labor strikes, the bloody summer of 1919, the Palmer raids, of the kind of the first Red Scare. There's a lot going on. But at the same time, there's a belief in all that chaos that still institutions matter, that still the courts may be conservative, but they're there and they can be counted on to mete out justice. The newspapers may have a partisan slant every now and then, but they're going to basically tell you things that are true. 1968, kind of the same kind of chaos, the assassinations of MLK and RFK, Tet Offensive, Chicago, convention, on and on. Urban riots, lots of chaos, lots of mistrust, a feeling that the social order is breaking down. More challenges to the establishment, but kind of selectively on Vietnam, on things like later on when Watergate. Not a belief that everyone is lying, not a belief that everyone should be cynical, not a retreat from any kind of a common discussion, right? And so just in the last couple of days, watching the coverage of the wildfires in LA, right?
Yeah.
Twitter's useless. It's all full of conspiracy theories, right? Local news has been gutted, so you're not getting a lot of journalists on the ground covering these things. There's some there, but not to the degree in which you would normally have. The federal response, well, Biden will probably squeak something out in the last couple of days, but then you're going to have Trump. He's mocking Governor Newsom. The idea that a president would mock the governor of a state experiencing a major natural disaster is just
as it's happening.
And yet we're kind of used to it, right? I haven't seen a lot of commentary on that. That's Trump being Trump. But it's a radically different moment we're in. And so as much as I always try, my instinct, my knee-jerk reflection is to go back and look for counterparts in history, I think we're really off the rails here.
Okay, because I had always wondered, like, are we looking at the past through rose-colored glasses or not? But you're certainly not a person that I think dons the rose-colored glasses too often, so I'll take your word for it.
I've never been accused of being too sunny. Normally the comment when people read one of my books is, I really enjoyed it, but man, it was depressing. Yeah, that's history, And often I find myself bizarrely feeling optimistic about our present. I haven't, not in this moment, but in the past, just because I know how bad things have gotten in America before and we've gotten through it, right? And I think there's a little bit of solace there. I think too many Americans have a very rose-colored vision that you can make America great again, that it used to be perfect and we somehow got away from this. One thing I think students learn when they take, maybe not high school history, but when you kind of get into the weeds in a college level course is, oh, wow, things were messed up back then in a lot of the same ways they're messed up now. Some ways they were even worse, right? So there's a way in which you can take some kind of solace from that. So I've never put too much of a positive spin on the past. And it gives me some comfort here. Again, I know I felt horrible going into the first Trump term. We limped through it. We got out of it. we're not dead yet. I have no room for the pessimists and the fatalists who kind of are writing off the country at this moment. We're not there yet. You can't give in yet. But it's going to be a tough 4 years.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things people don't remember from the first Trump administration, but I think it has been memory holds how close we were to the brink by the end of his first term, and that really speaking, I remember thinking about what could happen to people who are like me, people who have, who are critical of the president going into that election. I don't want to burn that segment now, but it seems like people have forgotten where we were in the summer of 2020, at least from the Trump perspective. They only seem to remember the rioting and that sort of thing.
Right. And they've put all that. They what they do remember from 2020, they somehow attached to Biden, right? The COVID shutdown and the civil unrest somehow became Biden's problem. The people when the Trump campaign was asking, were you better off 4 years ago than you were today? And the entire country didn't scream no, was really kind of surprising given how bad things were in 2020 when we were, bleaching groceries on our driveway and, not seeing people for, a month or so at the time. Just total, and of course, ending with January 6th, right? I mean, you put a fine point on the country falling apart. That was a really a stark moment. And again, it has been memory hold.
Civil rights, the fight for civil rights seems to be the counter for a lot of this in broad steps. Like, where do you think we are in terms of fighting for civil rights now? Like what is the next play? I mean, I guess, and are there any precedents for that?
I mean, no, the precedents for this are that we're going to be rolling backwards. We're going to see a retreat from all the gains. And it's not going to be the kind of stalling on civil rights progress that we saw with Nixon and with Reagan. We're going to see a real rollback. And they've been explicit about this. Project 2025 laid out a vision for a lot of the federal government to be depopulated with civil servants who are nonpartisan experts who do their job and replaced with true believers from the MAGA cult. And one of the places they have singled out for this change is the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. Now, I'm writing a book about the Civil Rights Division right now. In the early 60s, it was created in 1957 as part of a Civil Rights Act, but limped along for a few years until it got some real strength at the end of the Eisenhower administration and really in the early years of the Kennedy administration, when it was staffed with individuals who really believed in its purpose, who really thought they should be intervening in the South to make elections fair, who really thought civil rights laws were good and should be upheld, who really thought court-ordered desegregation was wise and constitutional and needed to be pursued. And it was by having those people in positions of power, the Assistant Attorney General on down through the line lawyers, who believed in the mission, got it done. Right? Our institutions matter, but the individuals who staff them matter more. And what Trump has said in plain daylight, although they tried to deny it during the campaign, is that they're going to get rid of all those good lawyers at the Civil Rights Division. They're going to staff them with a bunch of, heritage Federalist flacks who are going to rubber stamp all of Trump's wildest dreams. So think about the first Trump term when he sent Barr his fantasies about voter fraud. And Barr had the lawyers at Civil Rights check him out. And they said, no, there's nothing here. Well, now imagine you've got an army of true believers in there who are going to say, well, maybe these conspiracy theories have some merit and we should look into this. And there's probably this and probably that. That's going to send things off in an entirely different direction. Or think about the enforcement of civil rights laws, right? There's a way in which all the machinery that has been set up to protect racial and religious minorities in this country will be spun around on a dime and used to vilify those same communities, right? They're going to make sure that the voting section, which usually defends the rights of marginalized people to gain access to the ballot, well, maybe they're going to turn it around and investigate local voting groups who aren't purging the rolls of illegal voters or whatever fantasy they have. They're going to turn the anti-discrimination arm around. And what's discrimination now? It's anything that discriminates against white men, right? It's going to be an anti-DEI campaign, right? And so there's a very aggressive agenda there to turn it around. And the staffing of the Civil Rights Division from the top down is going to be a hugely important issue to watch. But the second part of this is already in place, and that's the Trump judges who've been confirmed. So many of Trump's wildest, craziest ideas in the first term crashed and burned when they ran into judges, Republican or Democrat appointed. There was both of them who shot him down time and time again. Well, now he's got an army of Eileen Cannons on the bench, and they can venue shop, and they'll get these guys.
Including, I should add, I'm sorry to interject, but including Supreme Court.
Yes, that's where we're going next. Yeah.
That he can call on the phone, which you allegedly did with Alito this week, just to say, hey, I don't really want to go to court.
Yeah, that was my last point. Is that they've got the judges all the way up to the Supreme Court, and he's got 3 new ones on there, along with the 3 who are already effectively on his side in his pocket. And they're going to greenlight a lot of this stuff. So the civil rights stuff that I work on, mostly on issues of kind of race and voting discrimination, I think we're headed to a real turnaround there. But we're already seeing the turnaround on other issues of individual rights. And if you look at the issues of sexual identity and freedom, the turnaround there is already in place, right? They killed Roe, and they're going to work their way back through the decisions that led to Roe, Griswold on contraception. We're going to get probably a turnover on that. They're working their way back on gay marriage. We've got cases coming up that are going to clearly overturn Obergefell, are going to move us back to a level in which you could have state level bans on not just gay marriage, but on sodomy, on all kinds of things that we thought had been off the books for a good while now. They're going to roll those back. And I don't think it's being alarmist or paranoid to think that this is coming. I think you're naive if you assume that history is a steady march forward, that it's always progress. There's this sort of Whiggish view of history, that things get better. You know, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. Yeah, King said that, but he spent every day of his life working to bend it, right? And he knew that other people were pushing it back on the other side. And that's where we're at now, is the forces pushing back on that have a lot of momentum. And it's going to be a lot of, I think, rear guard defensive action on the part of a lot of people just to make sure that it's all not wiped away immediately.
There were, in a weird way, as bad as it was, a lot of saving graces during the first Trump administration. But I think primary among them was the problem that the Trump White House had, which is that they had to convince their party.
That's a good
The
point.
GOP establishment was still trying to figure out what happened, just like Democrats, but, less openly upset about it. Still everyone was just scratching their heads and being like, how could this happen? We didn't think this would happen. I mean, the Republican Party fought Trump tooth and nail during those primaries, right? There's no convincing that needs to happen in the GOP anymore, because anybody who has even mild dissent, I mean, look at what happened to people like Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney. I mean, I am not fans of these people at all, but they were just cannibalized because they had the audacity to be like, I don't know, I think the Capitol riot was a bad idea and probably people should go to jail for it. It's like just completely cast.
He may prosecute Cheney for this if he wants to.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a aggressive culture of penalizing dissent in the GOP now that has effectively pushed out a lot of moderates, and the moderates that may still exist in the GOP are, I suspect often too scared to really push back on anything. So I think, the first Trump administration was still animated by a lot of these visions, but really ran into a lot of roadblocks that I don't think exist this time. You have the entire Republican Party has remade itself in the image of Trump. The lesson of 2020 was not like, oh, maybe that was bad. They were just like, we didn't do that hard enough.
Didn't do it enough, right? And we saw, again, the gap between 2016 when they're all running against him, they're trying to knock him down, and 2020 when the Republican Party platform is basically whatever Donald Trump is for, we are for too. I mean, that's maybe I'm truncating it, but that's the spirit of the document they sent out. They didn't have a real platform of what they believe. They said, whatever Trump wants, we want. That's it. And you've seen this with, the absurd press coverage over these comments about, claiming Greenland or making Canada the 51st state. And these Republicans who, if they had any kind of sense of shame or self-awareness, might feel bad about that, but they're just going on out there and licking that boot hard.
I was disappointed to see Chuck Schumer say that if you change the Gulf to Gulf of America, that's fine. If you work with us on whatever random deal, I'm like, it's
so bad.
Wait, can we not engage, sir, with that?
Yep.
There's no material benefit to a single American life in changing that. So that level of priorities, you're already by agreeing that that's a priority of some kind, you are already giving Trump more power.
Yeah,
but the Trump movement isn't the first political movement that's attempted to do like radical changes in the government. And before we start spinning the clock back and go through some forgotten history of Trump 1. I'm just curious your opinion, Kevin. Like they want to make all these changes. I think they have, a much wider landing strip to take off of, right? I think there's a lot more bandwidth that they have to work with and a lot more resources to work with now. People have tried to change this country radically before, and it hasn't usually worked out that well. I'm curious if you what you think about the prospects of how successful, even if all the trains run on time and all the notes harmonize, is it possible? Is there any precedent for reshaping a government as totally as they hope?
Yeah, it's the complete opposite direction, but the creation of a New Deal, right?
Oh, yeah. I guess, yeah.
Think about that. And it came in a period in which, through the 1920s, 3 Republican administrations were so successfully fused with business like anyone had never seen before. Democrats are so ineffectual and a minority power. People are wondering if they're going to go the way of the Whigs. Is this even going to last any longer? And the idea of the Republican form, I'm talking capital R, Republican Party form of government, is so pronounced, and it's a total hands-off form of government, do nothing. It's not laissez-faire. They actually were actively intervening on the side of big business. But the government itself wasn't supposed to do much. Coolidge is the perfect encapsulation for this. Hoover catches all the blame, but this is Coolidge's creation. Coolidge, believe, when Dorothy Parker found out Calvin Coolidge had died, she asked, how could they tell? Because he was so little a presence. According to a White House usher who'd worked for 4 decades there, Calvin Coolidge assumed fewer tasks and took on fewer duties than anyone else in the office. He was once asked, how did he keep healthy in a job that had broken the health of Woodrow Wilson and killed Warren Harding? He said, by assuming as few tasks as possible, right? So it's a very limited government. And then we go from that to the New Deal, in which government is everywhere, doing countless roles, countless agencies. The size of government, the scope of government, the reach of it really is tremendous. Well, how do we get from one to the other? It's the depression. It's the crash. It's the total wipe out and discrediting of that old system. And that's where the lack of trust, the lack of communication, the lack of consideration for each other, the lack of belief in collective action, all really comes together. We're not in a moment like 1932, where the bottom is clearly fallen out and the old assumptions that business tycoons are working for our interests and are the people we trust the most, that hasn't been discredited to the same degree today. The idea that the old system is completely crumbled. But there's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of calls for reinvention. And I think the Musk Ramaswamy Doge nonsense is not going to do a whole lot. It's going to wind up being like every other reinventing government. I'm doing scare quotes here for people at home. Reinventing government, a commission that
it feels performative. I agree.
Yeah. It's so performative, right? So I don't think we're going to see that level of change. But in terms of kind of a remarkable rebuilding, it can happen pretty quickly. The changes in government between 1933 and 1934 amazing, right? So we could see a quick move. Now, does Trump and this Congress have it in them? No, they don't. This is going to be a very dysfunctional Congress. I don't think we've quite reckoned with what this Congress is going to look like when Mike Johnson, who is not a good leader, has like a 1 or 2 vote lead in the House, right? How much are they actually going to get through? So you may see, given the Democrats caving in on immigration and the Lake and Riley bill this week, you may see enough support split away for the insane deportation plans. I think that will probably happen given the way in which the border tends to scare DC politicians like no other issue. You might see that. The tariffs, I don't know. I don't think they're going to happen. I think enough, just a fraction of the Republican Party will understand that that's insanity and a recipe for disaster and might resist them. Whether Trump browbeats them into accepting it could happen. I'm a little more doubtful on that. But so those are the two big things, along with the kind of the gutting of government and the weaponizing of government towards partisan ends. Those are the three things that I think are most likely to happen. And if they do, it's going to be a disaster. I mean, the weaponization of government will cause us some kind of problems, but the 1-2 punch of mass deportation of basically the entire workforce in the agricultural sector and tariffs, which ratchet up prices at home, would be a nightmare, right?
I may speculate something if I can just tell me what you think of it. As far as these big changes are concerned, the impression that I get from just watching how the election played out and everything else, Trump's supporters, his fans, may not necessarily be game for the massive changes he's talking about as much as the excitement of this. It seems like the people who want substantive change seem to be much more his critics. And I think that what I would be on the lookout for is if things start to unravel, if material conditions for people start to worsen, which is very possible because the competency that people are working, if they would theoretically turn on him over 4 years, and that's a very optimistic take. But I just don't think that his supporters and themselves have that hunger to actually see the change. They don't want to watch the immigrants being dragged out, but they like the rhetoric.
Yeah. I think some of them want to see the immigrants dragged out. I think
well, yes, of course. I did work at SPLC for a long time. I can tell you.
Yeah, no,
some of them definitely do.
I bet you can.
But I'm talking about the average Trump voter.
Yeah, but usually in a political dynamic like this, when the followers feel that the Great Revolution has not gone according to plan, it's the fault of not the leader, but the leader's followers, right? It's the people in the administration who have let him down, right?
Right.
And so you will never see all great things, according to MAGA people, will come directly from Trump. Any problems, any hiccups, any flaws in execution, any missteps in policy will be the fault of some underling. And that's true in any case, but in Donald Trump's case, where he very happily will throw anyone under the bus, so up to including Mike Pence last time, that'll be in place again. And so I think what you'll see they will be frustrated, but the blame will never go to Trump for them. I mean, for people on the margin, the kind of people who weren't crazy about Trump but voted for him because they either weren't crazy about the Democrats or just wanted change or were badly misinformed and really value the price of eggs or something, those people may be turned off. But the hardcore base, they'll go down with Trump to the end.
So that's my cope, I guess. Maybe the hope then is that the base itself, narrows. That would be your best. That's your best bet.
And only to narrow a little bit, right? I mean, again, this is why I didn't want to be pedantic about it, but when the first election returns came in and Trump was claiming a mandate, I kept beating back against this. This wasn't a mandate, right? When Obama won by 7%, it wasn't a mandate. I mean, I think you could argue maybe it was, but Trump winning by like 1.2% or something, that's not a mandate. We're pretty low on the scale. That doesn't mean he didn't win. It doesn't mean he doesn't get the powers of the presidency that come with the system. You don't have to have a mandate, but they invoke that mandate to get a sense of, well, this is what all the American people want, right? And it's a way to wash away the opposition, which, received almost as many votes, right? So there's a way in which that projection of confidence will will work to build them up, but it can very easily erode, right? As that assumption that, oh, well, Trump got what he wanted and he's got this Congress and he should be able to do anything. Well, now why aren't we getting results, right? So we're going to see some impatience there, I think.
Well, fellas, do you want to hop in the time machine?
Where I live.
I can't think of a better guest to jump in the DeLorean and hit the gas with.
When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're going to see some serious shit.
I'll just start one with one that comes to mind. So we talked about the summer of 2020, and this is a little bit more of a heavier thing, but the unmarked federal agents. Do you remember out in Washington D.C., followed by unmarked vans in Portland during the riots there that nobody could identify, and then there was all these questions like, did they break the and then you have officials saying, well, the assassination. Or alleged assassination of Michael Reynolds, the anarchist who shot a Trump supporter dead on the street. I remember watching the video very soon after it went live because I was monitoring at that time. And I think he was shot 32 times by U.S. Marshals after Trump said there must be retribution on Fox News. And I just bring up that cluster of three things as something that I feel like people don't remember. And the thing that left me most on edge about that, going into that election and the possibility of Trump resuming power. And that's the type of stuff that makes me, quite paranoid.
Yeah. The Michael Reynolds stuff is especially crazy. I feel like even at the time, there wasn't really enough like concerted conversation about it, if that makes sense. Because
agreed.
He was shot like a gazillion times, and nobody seemed to really know exactly what happened. Even law enforcement couldn't get his story straight. Did he pull a gun on them? Why were there so many?
Well, the gun was found in his back pocket.
Like why send so many agents and from those departments to go try to arrest this person? And even the New York Times, like investigative teams, spent a long time looking at it and kind of came up blank on the other side of, and if I'm remembering correctly, their conclusion was just like, we don't know exactly what happened, but it is almost certainly not what the government said happened, and it's, oh, Jesus, man. I haven't thought about it in a while, but it's rough.
It's not like wide scale shock troops on the street, something like that. But these little, around the corner, sneaky, bizarre, sort of, authoritarian moments. I worry about how they could, be perpetuated. We've already heard a lot of stuff about how the Department of Justice might change in the future. And I think that's probably where the combination of what has already happened and what could happen leaves me in a place where that's my most, that's the most sensitive point for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so many to choose from. As I thought about this, different moments kept flooding back. The paper towels being thrown at hurricane victims in Puerto Rico, Sharpie Gate with the hurricane and extending into Alabama. All of the bizarre ways in which he diminished not just the office, but the idea of competency. Right? It's like he can't imagine anyone else is actually good or reliable at their job and just wants to sneer about it and take pot shots. One of the more serious ones, though, that I think is dangerous, and again goes into this question of what happens when Trump staffs an administration not with kind of the standard replacement players from the Republican Party, where you would have probably gotten a lot of these people in any administration, right? And instead with true believers like Pete Hegseth and Kash Patel. Thinking about what happened with the Department of Defense that last year, with both Mark Milley and Esper, Defense Secretary Esper, both related that Trump wanted to use the military to shoot protesters in the streets. And naturally, both the uniformed military and the civilian authorities in charge at DOD said, no, we do not do that. That's kind of a basic principle here.
If the looting when the looting starts,
the shooting starts. Yeah. And so what happens when you get someone who greenlights that or looks the other way and doesn't want to, maybe let some low-level person take the blame for it. You're gonna have a disaster, right? And that's what really terrifies me, is that all the massive protests we saw in the first year of the Trump campaign, and I mean the Women's March. I'd gone down. I did a talk in Dallas for something. I remember the first weekend of the Trump administration, and so I flew out from Dallas to Philly during the shutdown of the airports when they banned anyone from, I think it was from an Arab country, is how they originally framed it. Whatever.
Muslim.
It was amazing. There were crowds outside, both Dallas and the Philly airport, huge crowds outside protesting, chanting. There were lawyers on the scene. Well, what happens if one of those marches gets fired upon, right? You're not going to see another one like it. Certainly not that size. It's going to be a real repressive moment. And it's a line that once we cross it, I don't think you can come back from that. And that's what really terrifies me. I hope I've cheered people up today, but that's what really terrifies me.
If I can spin back, there's a couple members, I mean, there's a lot of members of the incoming administration that raise concerns for many reasons. But I think a lot of the sort of most brutal items on the Trump agenda, already they've made pretty clear that they're going to use anti-immigration stuff to try to accomplish it. New York Times reported, just last week that they've been looking around and trying to find some kind of contagious disease that is going around in Mexico so that they can seal the border up, and try to make a public health argument, not very subtle here. But the people who are the architects of that kind of thinking are folks like Stephen Miller and Thomas Homan. Mike, you did a whole investigative series about Stephen Miller, so I'll let you talk about him. But Thomas Homan was the ICE director and is, coming back in to be the border czar. I think a lot of people forget that this dude is just like obsessed with great replacement theory. And, at activist conferences will basically say everything that is great replacement theory and be like, well, it's not totally a theory, and does the really not very subtle thing that Republicans do when they promote great replacement theory and just be like, well, it's about Democratic votes. That's the issue, is votes, when it's really, it's not, they're not complaining about Scandinavians coming into the US, right? So it's obviously ethnic and racially tinged. And there was an episode where Thomas Homan went to a conference that was hosted by the white supremacist podcaster Nick Fuentes, and by all appearances seemed like he was scheduled to speak until a mutual friend of Mike and I, Chris Mathias, a HuffPost reporter, essentially walked up to him and was like, so what are you doing here? And from the reporting, it really sounds like he was like, well, nothing. Whoops. And sort of hightailed it out of there. I believe that was the one that Marjorie Taylor Greene ended up speaking at. Anyway,
she's legitimate though, because she's one of our most prominent leaders.
But it's like, this guy's not exactly subtle, and the further you wind back the clock, the less subtle he gets. But he's poised to go into power, and Stephen Miller is really not too different. But Mike, I'll let you talk about Stephen Miller for a second.
No, I don't. I feel like most people know him, as a kind of boogeyman from the Trump era. I think that just the most important thing to note about Miller in this context and the influence he's had over these, the MAGA immigration ideas is that he got his own ideas from Jared Taylor of American Renaissance, from Peter Brimlow of and these people reject white supremacist, white nationalist label. I don't have to use those labels if we don't want. We can simply talk about the fact that they are the biggest proponents of this great replacement conspiracy that has been, it has undergirded so many different terror attacks, and these are people who were sort of kept at the margins trying to fight their way into power.
And then you had somebody like Stephen Miller be like one of the few people with some little touch of power to say, hey, I like this stuff. And then all of a sudden he was thrust into a position of power that he himself, I'm sure, was shocked to obtain. And that to me is scary. These are not only radical thinkers, but like, deeply racist people.
Yeah, I think another thing I want to revisit is the deplorable of 2017. This was a big inauguration party planned by the likes of Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, Cassandra Fairbanks was there, Gavin McInnes, Jim Hoft. I mean, really like proto-MAGA. And a lot of these people have turned into big stars. Cassandra Fairbanks, not so much. I have no idea what she's doing now besides putting diapers on her pet monkey.
She's raising her family of monkeys.
Yeah. It's not a joke. She has a bunch of monkeys.
Okay.
And it's like, it's wild to see how those people sort of became stars.
Yeah.
But even then, a lot of these people, like Jack Posobiec is part of TPUSA, he might as well just be like establishment Republican at this point. Mike and I were talking the other day. He's really lost his edge. His Pepes used to be much more based and rare, but so some people have
one thing to point out about those guys, just real quick, want to throw in is the fact that the National Review, if you recall, wrote like an against Trump piece, like you remember way back. Thing. The entire conservative media ecosystem collapsed during Trump's run because of Trump and the popularity of Trump. And these people happened to be there at the right time to fill that void. They filled it very quickly with the people who were most enthusiastic about him. And, and they sort of replaced that, everything that we associated with the Republican Party media-wise.
Yeah, but I bring it up because there was this like vicious infighting that happened around the deplorable. It was like Baked Alaska is out because he can't stop saying that he loves Hitler, but this guy is epic because he knows how to not vomit on himself when he speaks on TV. Like
Richard Spencer got rejected from that. If you recall, that was like the big part of it.
And I think it's interesting, like a lot of the people that were up and coming then have either gone on to have their own careers. Some of them have faded into obscurity. Some of them have been absorbed into the GOP establishment as it has been remade in the image of Trump. There's a very similar thing happening right now. You could see a glimpse of it when Elon Musk and everybody on the MAGA right was screaming at each other over H-1B visas. And there is very much a they're waving like a racism wand detector. And if it goes off like too much, you're out. But
right.
But if it doesn't go off enough, then you're also
there's an acceptable band in the middle.
Yeah. They're looking for like a finely tuned amount of like racism and saying the R word now, which is apparently what they're interested in.
That's on the hot list.
But that's been really interesting to watch, and I'm curious to see sort of what the next, like what generation 2 MAGA stars look like. Is the Bronze Age pervert going to, in the raw egg nationalists? Are they going to be like the new hot commodities? I don't know. I mean, I
doubt it because at that time, Trump was desperate for support.
Yeah.
And now he doesn't need Bronze Age pervert. Bronze Age pervert needs him, or people like that need him.
Yeah.
And it's kind of shifted.
I mean, that's right. He's the center of the universe now.
On that note, maybe the last stop we can make on this time machine is probably one of my favorite moments of Trump won, which was the social media summit they held at the White House, where Tim Pool, who still wore a beanie to the White House,
very respectful,
and like Carpe Donk Dumb, and all these just like weird pro-Trump meme people, they pulled them all into the White House and basically patted them on the back and were like, "We love you, thank you." Except you, Ben Garrison.
Yes, Ben Garrison was deemed 2 inches.
Yeah. So it's just But like that relationship, that the Trump movement has with its social media people is like so important to them. And it was even back then. But it is, it was just like this cartoonish episode. I was living in DC at the time, so I decided to like go walk around, and you had like the InfoWars people outside the gates basically doing the Eric Andre, like, let me in bit of like, oh, that's weird. How come Alex Jones wasn't invited to the White House? And how come this wasn't like...
There's a conspiracy about that.
Tim Pool is an interesting one because now we see like his trajectory from the social media summit to now is like he kind of took a weird path with all this like Russia stuff with that like tenant media or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Another podcast episode possibly we'll bring on Bob Silverman for that because he's the Pool expert.
Good. Nice.
Yeah. I think that concludes, our brief journey through time. To wrap things up, Kevin, we've spent the last, however long, basically talking about how terrible we think things could be, and how bleak the road ahead looks. And it is quite bleak. Really digesting that is important before thinking about what happens next.
Yeah.
A lot of commentary around Trump, especially the sort of like brain dead hyperpartisan stuff, it kind of gets into the zone of being almost hysterical, right? Like sometimes. I would be curious to hear your take. Like, how would you advise people, or what would you say to people in respect to how to consider and digest like these very real concerns without passing into being hysterical, right? It's like we can talk about all the things we're worried about, but how do we make that worry useful and not just panic ourselves or lose the plot or become utterly convinced that like Elon Musk is using a birder account called Adrian Dittman, and just listen to the voices. They're the same. This is proof. We got them. Like how can we avoid the temptation to fall into that stuff?
I think you've got to straddle the line between you can't give up entirely. I have no patience for the LOL nothing matters crowd. Stuff matters. You can't just roll over and give up. Tim Snyder's version of, don't obey in advance. Don't give up in advance either. Don't just roll over and say, well, this is it. He's got the course. He's got this. There's a lot of bad things out there, but he hasn't swept the table. Don't believe him that he's got a mandate, but he's got unlimited power, right? At the same time, you can't be plugged into everything. The first weeks of the Trump administration last year were exhausting because there was a new outrage, not every day, like every hour, some weird thing he tweeted or said or proposed or whatever. And we were all scrambling. Well, what if this? What if that? You can't do that with everything, right? So like Greenland, Canada, it's not going to happen. But yeah, it's a sign of his territorial ambitions. It's a sign of the kind of the fascist impulses. I'm not going to lay awake at night worried about that, right? I've got a couple things I'm really going to focus on. Again, for me, the Civil Rights Division, just given that's where my head at is in my own work, and I feel like I can comment on that. I'll be sure to watch that, DOJ and stuff like that. The politicization of the administration, there's a lot of stuff to worry about, but you can't worry about everything. You're going to be able to focus on nothing, right? So really, think of it as, we've kind of got a zone defense out there, right? Let's all focus on our areas in which we can invest some time, some expertise, some knowledge to help build up and defend institutions and people that need defending, and trust that other people are going to take some of the other ones, right? And so the whole world is not on your shoulders as it might seem when you're scrolling through your social media feed and getting every outrage fed to you like a fire hose, right? Pick one or two you can really focus on. Pick if you're in a local community that you've got something you can contribute to, I think that's a very useful way to get involved, right? Especially given the fact that one of the differences between now and the first Trump term is that Democrats actually run a lot more states and localities than they did then. And there are a lot more ways in which they can wage, I hate the term resistance, but they can wage an effective resistance against what's going on at the national level, and it takes people to get involved. So don't give up. but don't get overwhelmed either.
Sound advice. Well, Kevin, thanks for joining Mike and I. It's been a pleasure. You are the first full-length guest on the Posting Through It return.
Ooh.
So
I'm glad you didn't tell me. That's a lot of pressure. Well, thanks for having me. This is great.